They say if a man stays single too long, something must be wrong with him. They question his masculinity, his standards, his past. But what if the world has it backwards? What if the longer a man is single, the more he becomes something most people are too afraid to be: whole, aware, and emotionally evolved? When a man remains single for a significant period of time, people around him begin to question his choices. They ask why he's still alone. They wonder if he's afraid of commitment, or worse, if something is wrong with him. But what they fail to realize is that time spent alone isn't always about absence. Sometimes it's about building presence. It's about discovering a version of oneself that doesn't rely on external confirmation. And so, the longer a man is single, the more he learns how to sit with his own emotions and handle them with care, not shame. He begins to understand his triggers, his needs, and his patterns, not because someone else pointed them out, but because he faced them in the silence of his own company. When there's no partner to project onto, he starts owning his emotional landscape. The highs, the lows, the boredom, the elation, all of it becomes his to explore, without judgment. That's where true emotional self-sufficiency begins, not in denial, but in awareness. He realizes he doesn't need someone to calm his storms. He learns how to build shelter within himself. Most men are taught to be strong, but not necessarily to be emotionally intelligent. They're praised for their ability to endure, but rarely encouraged to feel. But solitude has a way of peeling away those layers. In solitude, he's no longer performing strength. He's discovering what real inner peace looks like. It's in the quiet moments, when there's no one to impress or protect, that he realizes strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent resilience. Sometimes it's crying and then choosing to rise without needing applause. Over time, he stops chasing distractions. He no longer fills the void with fleeting romances, loud parties, or shallow connections. He learns that solitude isn't something to escape. It's something to embrace. It becomes his teacher, his healer. And that healing gives birth to clarity. He begins to separate what he wants from what he's been conditioned to want. He starts to ask better questions. Does this relationship support my growth? Is this love expanding me or confining me? Do I feel safe to be vulnerable, or am I constantly on guard? This clarity leads him to a place where he stops asking for permission to feel. He allows himself to experience softness, affection, and introspection without labeling them as weakness. He nurtures his mental health, tends to his emotional wounds, and creates routines that feed his soul, not just his ego. And in doing so, he no longer waits for a woman to complete him, because he no longer sees himself as incomplete. This is the type of man who becomes emotionally self-sufficient, not cold, not distant, but whole. Whole enough to love from a place of abundance, not desperation. He no longer enters relationships hoping someone will fix what's broken. He does the hard work of fixing it himself, or at least understanding it. He stops viewing women as therapists, saviors, or emotional crutches. Instead, he desires a partner, not a caretaker. He becomes fluent in his own emotional language, which means he stops being afraid of others' emotions too. He knows how to hold space, not just because it sounds good, but because he's had to hold space for himself. That emotional maturity allows him to give without controlling, to care without clinging, and to love without losing himself. This kind of man is rare because he doesn't operate from lack. He's not driven by the fear of being alone. In fact, he's at peace with it. And that peace gives him power, power to choose wisely, to walk away when needed, and to set standards that reflect the work he's done. He won't settle for chaotic love just to say he's not alone. He'd rather stand in his solitude than crumble in connection. The beauty of his journey is that while others may see it as loneliness, he knows it's transformation. They see isolation, he sees evolution. They see waiting, he sees preparation. And even though the world keeps telling him that real men pursue, conquer, and possess, he understands now that real men heal, grow, and become. When a man spends a long time alone, the world assumes he's just too proud or too picky. They say he's chasing perfection or that his standards are too high. But what most people don't realize is that time alone doesn't make him arrogant. It makes him aware. It gives him the chance to truly observe the world around him without the noise of emotional entanglements clouding his vision. And when a man becomes aware, he begins to see people not for who they pretend to be, but for who they really are. He no longer gets swept away by charm alone. He's no longer intoxicated by a beautiful smile that lacks substance, or sweet words that have no roots in reality. He notices the tone underneath the compliments. He catches the shifts in energy. He pays attention to whether someone shows up in hard times or just when it's convenient. He learns to value authenticity over aesthetics. He doesn't fall for potential anymore. He looks for patterns. This kind of awareness doesn't come overnight. It comes from getting it wrong. It comes from trusting people who betrayed that trust, loving deeply only to be misunderstood, or giving too much to those who never intended to give back. And when you've been through that, when you've loved in your blindness and suffered in your silence, you start to crave something different. You don't just want love anymore. You want clarity. You want something that's grounded, not just exciting. So he stops being impressed by surface-level performances. He doesn't care how good someone looks in pictures if they don't know how to show up in real life. He's no longer interested in perfection. He's drawn to realness. That means he'll wait longer. He'll ask deeper questions. He'll listen not just to the answers, but to the silences, to the hesitation, to the contradiction between what someone says and what they do. And when he sees inconsistency, he doesn't ignore it like he used to. He doesn't try to fix it or justify it. He simply steps back. Because now he knows that emotional peace is more valuable than a fleeting connection. He knows that it's better to be alone than entangled in confusion. That kind of man becomes deeply selective, not because he thinks no one is good enough for him, but because he finally knows what he is worthy of. He also begins to notice the way energy speaks before words do. He's not swayed by people who try too hard to be what they think he wants. He notices when someone is being performative versus when they're being present. He's not interested in being impressed. He's interested in being understood. And if he feels like he has to pretend, shrink, or constantly prove himself just to be accepted, he walks away. Because when a man knows himself, he doesn't stay where he has to beg to be seen. This depth of selectivity confuses others. Some call him cold. Others say he's unrealistic. But the truth is, he's simply evolved past the need to rush into anything. He doesn't date out of loneliness. He doesn't pursue to feed his ego. He connects only when it feels aligned, not just attractive. That's why he's able to let go of relationships that don't serve his growth, even when they look good on the outside. Because he's no longer chasing the illusion of connection. He's chasing something real. Something that doesn't leave him questioning his worth every night. It's not that he doesn't want love. He does. But not the kind that's convenient. Not the kind that asks him to settle for halfway. He wants love that's honest, mutual, and emotionally safe. And because of that, he takes his time. He watches how people handle conflict, not just how they behave when things are easy. He notices how someone treats others when no one is watching. He observes the small details, the forgotten calls, the backhanded jokes, the energy shifts after setting boundaries, because those small things always speak louder than the grand gestures. He no longer fears walking away. In fact, walking away has become his protection. It's not because he's hard to love. It's because he knows the cost of ignoring red flags. And when a man has spent enough time alone, he realizes that peace is a non-negotiable. No matter how beautiful, how exciting, or how promising someone seems, if they disturb that peace, they cannot stay. He may have once been a man who confused attention with affection, who mistook chemistry for compatibility, but not anymore. Now, he watches more than he speaks. He listens to his intuition and he trusts it, because he's no longer looking for someone to complete him. He's looking for someone who can meet him where he already is, aware, intentional, and whole. When a man stays single long enough, something incredible begins to unfold. The world assumes he's just waiting for the right woman to come along. But what's really happening is much deeper. He begins to build a life that no longer revolves around the pursuit of love. The obsession with finding the one fades into the background, and in its place, he discovers a deeper version of himself. A man who, instead of living in anticipation of a relationship, learns how to live in fulfillment of his own becoming. He stops measuring his worth by how desired he is. He stops placing timelines on when he should marry or settle down, not because those things aren't important, but because he realizes that a life of meaning doesn't begin at love. It begins at purpose. So he turns inward. He pours into the spaces in his life that were once neglected. He strengthens his body, sharpens his mind, deepens his spirituality, and in doing so, he becomes rooted not in the idea of who he should be for someone else, but in the truth of who he is for himself. His friendships deepen. He no longer surrounds himself with people just to avoid loneliness. He becomes more intentional about his circle. He creates bonds based on truth, not convenience. Conversations become richer. Time alone becomes valuable. He starts to enjoy his own company, not as a way to escape others, but as a way to come home to himself. He fills his days with structure, challenge, growth, not out of a need to prove anything to the world, but simply because he understands now that the more solid his foundation, the less likely he is to crumble when life gets hard. He begins to explore new interests, travel, learn, evolve. He no longer waits for a partner to give him permission to live fully. He creates a routine that brings him joy, a rhythm that makes sense to him. Maybe it's waking up early to run while the world is still asleep. Maybe it's reading in silence, journaling his thoughts, building something from scratch. He builds a life that he doesn't want to escape from, a life where he is already complete. And because of that, the role of a woman in his life changes. He no longer looks for someone to save him from boredom or to fix his inner battles. He's already done the work. So now, love is no longer a necessity, it's an addition. Something beautiful to share, not something he needs to feel worthy. And that shift changes everything. It makes him approach relationships from a place of confidence, not fear. Curiosity, not desperation. He's not afraid to walk away if something doesn't feel right. He's not tempted to hold on to what isn't for him, just because he fears being alone. He knows that alone is not empty, it's sacred, and he treats it that way. In a world where so many rush into relationships to fill a void, he becomes the man who fills that void himself. And so he no longer asks questions like, will she love me? But rather, will she bring peace to this life I've built? That question alone becomes a filter. It shields him from chaos disguised as chemistry, from drama sold as passion, from attention that comes without intention. He sees clearly now, because when a man is no longer driven by the need to be loved, he begins to love himself better. And when he loves himself better, he stops settling for anything that forces him to shrink just to be accepted. He becomes a man who wants partnership, not dependence. He's not looking for someone to carry his emotional weight. He carries it just fine. He's looking for someone who understands the beauty of reciprocity, who can stand beside him, not behind him, who brings peace to his already peaceful life, not problems disguised as excitement. He's not interested in the thrill of chaos. He's tasted clarity now. He wants a woman who adds to the life he's already proud of, not someone who makes him question everything he's built. And because of that, his standards evolve. They're no longer rooted in superficial checklists, but in energy, alignment, depth. He doesn't need to be dazzled anymore. He just wants to feel understood, seen, respected, and he's willing to wait for that, no matter how long it takes. Because a man who has built a meaningful life alone will never destroy it for the sake of appearances. He doesn't need to post pictures to prove his happiness. He lives it daily, with or without a witness. He is not hardened, he's just grounded. And the more he grows, the less he is willing to gamble that growth on temporary satisfaction. Because he knows what it took to get here. He knows what it cost him to become this whole. And he knows that any love that asks him to abandon that wholeness is not love worth having. When a man remains single for a long time, people begin to assume he's forgotten how to love. But the truth is, the longer he walks alone, the more he redefines what love means to him. He stops viewing love as something to chase and begins to understand that real love, deep, stable, and nourishing love, only arrives when you're ready to receive it without losing yourself in it. And for that to happen, a man must first learn how to love himself in ways he was never taught. The journey of long-term singleness becomes a classroom, and in that space, he learns a lesson that so many skip over. You don't just attract what you want, you attract what you are prepared to maintain. So he starts asking himself questions that most never dare to confront. Can I give what I expect to receive? Can I hold space for another human being without needing to control them? Can I love without needing to be rescued? These aren't questions you ask when you're busy jumping from one relationship to another. These are questions that arise in stillness, in the quiet, in the absence of external validation. When a man sits with his thoughts, his past, his patterns, he sees it all clearly. The mistakes he made, the people he hurt, the wounds he never healed. And instead of blaming others, he takes responsibility. That accountability becomes the seed of emotional maturity. He begins to dismantle the version of love he inherited from movies, music, or broken role models. The version that told him love was only worth it if it was dramatic, intense, and all-consuming. He sees how that kind of love always left him empty, because it was rooted in need, not choice, in fear, not freedom. And so he decides to let it go. He stops romanticizing chaos. He stops confusing obsession for commitment. He no longer glorifies relationships that leave him drained. He chooses balance. He chooses stillness. He chooses love that feels like coming home, not like going to war. This shift transforms how he shows up. He's no longer desperate to be chosen. He's already chosen himself. That internal shift makes him more present, more patient. He no longer needs to chase. He listens. He observes. He allows people to reveal who they are without projecting fantasies onto them. He doesn't rush to label things. He knows that love takes time to unfold, and that the right person won't be scared of that pace. He stops leading with performance and starts leading with presence, because now he's not trying to impress, he's trying to connect. He understands that love is not about possession, it's about partnership, about holding space for another person's journey while still honoring your own. And because of that, he creates room for depth. He doesn't want surface-level intimacy. He wants to know what keeps someone up at night, what makes them feel alive, what they fear, what they value, what they dream about when no one's watching. That kind of love requires emotional strength. It requires vulnerability. And that's what he's been building all along, in the seasons when he walked alone. He no longer sees singleness as a curse. He sees it as preparation, not for the perfect relationship, but for the real one. The one that requires communication, compromise, self-awareness, and resilience. He understands that love will not always feel magical, that sometimes love is choosing each other, even when it's hard. That love is not always fireworks. Sometimes it's a quiet understanding that you are safe with someone, even when the world outside is falling apart. And because he's been alone long enough, he's no longer afraid of that kind of love. He's ready for it. He's built for it. He knows now that the goal isn't just to fall in love, it's to rise in it, to become better within it, to find someone who doesn't complete him, but complements the wholeness he's already cultivated. So he stops entertaining anything that asks him to dim his light just to feel needed. He'd rather be alone than be with someone who confuses possession for devotion. He'd rather wait than settle, because now he knows what peace feels like. And love, real love, will never cost him that. This doesn't mean he's hardened or closed off. On the contrary, he's open, but not desperate, receptive, but not naive. His heart is soft, but it's protected, not with walls, but with wisdom. He knows how to give now, without losing himself in the process. He knows how to receive without guilt or fear. And above all, he knows that love is not a destination to reach. It's a space to create. A space that only becomes sustainable when both people have done their inner work, when both have chosen wholeness first. Because when a man learns to stand fully in his own truth, love is no longer the place he runs to for validation. It becomes the sacred space he chooses only when it reflects the peace he already lives with.